Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Managing It Live. We're here with our workshop with the lovely Ashley Blackburn from Herrmann. She's the head of content, and today she is going to show us how to use your whole brain to ignite demand. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us for our event today. We're super excited to see what you have for us. So, why don't we start with a little intro about you and we can get this started?
Sure, happy to do that. So my name is Ashley Blackburn. I am the head of content at Herrmann and just wanted to share a few other tidbits about me. Hopefully we can sort of stay connected and kind of get to know each other. Feel free to jump in chat and let me know if any of this resonates with you. Um, I have spent most of my career in education, so I consider myself really a lifelong learner and experiential educator. I also identify as a PH dropout. So I did 3 years of a PhD program and then decided to withdraw. I do not recommend that. Actually, I kind of do recommend withdrawing, just maybe not doing 3 years first. I am a regular at my local coffee shop and also at book club, but I usually have not finished the reading. So I don't know if there are any other book club slackers here. And I'm a proud dog mom to two rescue pups. They will not be joining us today. They're actually at daycare. I try not to invite them when I have something exciting going on because they would steal the show. But if we have time at the end, this will be your incentive to stick around for the whole thing. I will show you some photos of them later. So what we're going to talk about today is whole brain thinking, which is a model and a framework to really understand how your thinking preferences influence the way that you approach your work and your life. And then take that to the next level and think about how do your thinking preferences in your audience that you're trying to write and create content for, how does that shape how they engage with what you're giving them? So I'm a 3-2-1-1 thinker. You can see just a quick snapshot of my profile there. And we'll talk a lot more about that and really jump back to that later. Um, so I just wanted to share, again, this what we're here to talk about. So we're using whole brain thinking to ignite demand in our audience. And there are four different distinct ways that people think. So we're going to go into those in a lot more depth, and I'll give you a chance. Keep in mind, this is a workshop, so this is a little more participatory than maybe some of the other sessions that you've had today, or just webinars in general. I'll give you a chance to apply this to your work and to really think through your own thinking preferences. So we'll dive into that. Just at a quick glance, what we're going to talk about, not necessarily in this order, we'll jump around, but I'll give you an introduction to the whole brain model. We will talk about why it matters, kind of what's a vision, what's the big, purpose of this, and how it can apply to your work. We'll go into some specific strategies for how you can sort of whole brainify your work, and I'll give you time to actually think through maybe some projects or campaigns that you're working on currently, and how you can make those whole brained. And then, of course, we'll also meet some of the different thinkers that you have in your audience. So back to my intro, I have one little Easter egg in here. I don't know if anyone caught it, but if you can finish the song lyric on this slide, then I'll know if I have any Swifties among us. So it's me, hi, and I am a secret Taylor Swift fan. So not sure if there are any other Swifties here, but just wanted to throw that out there. So as we jump into the model here, this is really whole brain thinking in a quick glance. So everyone, all people have four different distinct ways of thinking, and we all prefer to think in those problems, or in those sorry, I saw in the chat, Ann H says, I'm the problem. Yes, so you're a Swiftie too. Great. So we all have these four different distinct ways of thinking, and we prefer thinking in these quadrants differently. So some people will have a really strong preference toward logical, analytical, fact-based, and quantitative thinking. So we would refer to that as either the A quadrant or the blue quadrant, and your analytical type of thinking. Other people are going to naturally gravitate to structural thinking, or thinking that's kind of organized, sequential, planned, and detailed. Relational thinking in the red or C quadrant here is interpersonal, empathetic, kinesthetic, so kind of movement-based and emotional. And then in the D yellow quadrant, we have holistic, experimental, integrating, and synthesizing kinds of thinking. We call that experimental. So we'll come back to that again and again and keep repeating it. But I'm just curious, before we dive in too far, before you know too much about this, what do you think, if you had to guess, just based on this model, which quadrant do you think you would prefer the most? So I'm going to launch this poll. And I'll go ahead and give you just a minute. And it looks like we actually have a pretty decent split here coming in. I think, so everyone can see this, right? You can see the results kind of shifting and changing as people are chiming in. Is that right, Arno?
Yep, I can see it clear on my screen.
Great. So this is interesting. This actually validates sort of what I was thinking about marketing professionals, is that there's not going to be one clear breakdown. Depending on what type of marketing or what function you serve, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, that there's not really one clear winner necessarily. There's a lot of preference, it looks like we have in the kind of structural thinking, which makes sense because a lot of you are likely managing, campaigns and your content managers. So you are responsible for the plans and the roadmaps and making sure that things get produced and, working through that process. So that actually makes a lot of sense. Also the kind of experimental, that's where we see creative, innovative, kind of out of the box kinds of thinking. So that's great. All right. The HBDI assessment is Herrmann's tool to actually measure people's thinking preferences. So because you attended this session, you will get a free link to take the assessment. It takes usually about 20 minutes or so to complete, so we don't have time to do it today, but you can do it after the session. And what that assessment will do is it'll show you your degree of preference in each area. So you might think, a lot of you said you think that you might be strong in structural, green, B quadrant thinking. And so when we're looking at this just sample map here in the middle, this person has a really strong preference in relational thinking. So you can see how they kind of lean into the red. And then they have sort of moderate preference in the green thinking and then lower preferences in the yellow and blue. The dotted line that you see there indicates how they think under pressure. So I know none of us ever experience pressure in our jobs or in our lives, right? But if you did by some chance, then your thinking would likely shift and your behaviors might shift. And so the assessment also measures that. It can tell you what you might experience in terms of, differences in your typical thinking when you're experiencing stress or when you're feeling pressured. So that's what the HBDI assessment does. And what's great about it is that everyone ends up with a very unique set of thinking preferences and a very different looking map to their thinking. So I know Mary Ellen had mentioned earlier that lots of us have taken different assessments that sort of tell us what type we are, or you end up with one color. And this, this really isn't that at all. What the HBDI will tell you is how strongly you prefer to think in certain ways. And in some other areas, you might have less of a preference. But one of the keys is that all people think and act and have skills in all of the quadrants. So that's what whole brain thinking means. That's what that's all about, is that we are all thinking in all of the ways all the time. We just might have a stronger preference in some areas than others. So it can give you some really good insights into, what projects you might want to lean into or where you might be naturally inclined to contribute certain skills. And then some things that you might have blind spots or watch outs for. So I hope that you'll all take it. I hope that you'll all get really good insights into, your own thinking, and then start to think about how you can apply that to other people. So just to kind of test how we're doing with our understanding of whole brain thinking and the different quadrants, I gave you a really quick crash course introduction into the model. And so now we're going to take some time and look at, who are the people out there in our audience, the people that work with us on our teams, and what might be some clues that could tell us where their strength might be. So we'll start with this guy. Here are some things that we know about him. So he wants to review the pros and cons before making a decision. He is rocking a wearable tech tracker, like a fitness tracker or a smartwatch of some kind. Often wonders how things think or how things work. I'm always thinking about thinking. And some things that you might hear him say are, let's stick to the facts. And he might ask you, what's the bottom line? So knowing what you know about whole brain thinking, what would you guess? You can just drop it in chat. What would you guess would be potentially his strongest thinking preference based on this?
I think it's green. I want to say green. I could be wrong though.
Okay, Laura says analytical. Tatiana thinks blue quadrant. So we're seeing a lot of blue.
I'm alone in my thinking.
Okay. There are some clues in there that you're picking up on too. So our friend here, his strongest preference would be in blue, but Arnell, you're not wrong, because I think you probably clued in on the how things work, and the how is a really process-oriented kind of question. The reason that blue thinkers tend to really kind of lean into that or wonder how things work is that it's the basis of things. It's like, let's get to the facts. I want to know how this works. I need to ground myself in the facts before I can move on. So that's where that, and there is a little bit of shade of green in there too. All right. So our next friend here lives by their calendar, keeps a tidy desk, likes to have a place for everything. That's me, by the way. Needs to think things through before making a decision, and might ask you, what's the fine print and what are the next steps in the process? So what do we think this is?
I feel like I don't want to guess wrong after the last one.
Remember, everyone's a whole brain thinker, so you're not going to be wrong because we know that she already thinks in all four quadrants, right?
That is true. That is very true. But I'm going to go with everyone in the chat. Yes, I'm jumping on the bandwagon, and I'm going to say green.
That's a great guess. And I see people are trying to use the terminology too, which is awesome. I only gave you a very quick glimpse at it. So green is structural thinking. And you are absolutely right. So these are some really good behavioral clues. And this is a way that once you get more familiar with the model and once you kind of understand your own thinking preferences, you can start to get insights about the people around you. And you can start to sort of identify certain behaviors. And, you might not be absolutely right about their thinking, but you can sort of make some assumptions about how they might prefer to be communicated with or how you might work with them effectively. So, all right. So our next friend will probably ask you about your family and pets. She would be very upset that my dogs were not here today with me. Is the chair of the company social committee. Wonders what others are thinking and feeling all the time. And says, I want to make sure you're comfortable, or often will chime into meetings with, I get the feeling that something. So this is red, relational, right? You guys are picking up on this. And I actually started out easier. You may notice that I've gone a little bit in order here. So our last friend here is wondering, what if we try something new? They might say, I'm not interested in the details, or let's think outside the box. They make connections between ideas. They kind of do that naturally. And they like to brainstorm and doodle. And so, yes, you guys are definitely catching on. So yes, this would be a high yellow thinker. And as you saw, if I went back to my profile, I'm a very high yellow thinker. So this is something that, when I see these things on the screen, I get really excited. Other people, if you're a very low yellow preference thinker, you might be like, oh no, not another brainstorm. And so that's, what we're really trying to show is that people have all these different preferences. So one thing I shared as I was getting started was just that my background, I spent 15 years in education, and I felt like I wanted to try and find something that we all share as a common experience. And so we're all learners, right? And we've all had some experience with school. So this is a way for you to just kind of start thinking about your own clues to your own behaviors and who you are as a thinker. So when you think about yourself as a learner, take yourself back to school for a minute and just think, what kind of student were you? Did you really like listening to guest lectures, reviewing data, doing research, writing reports? If that sounds like you, drop a 1 in the chat. Did you take copious notes, keep track of assignments in a planner, and really like step-by-step instructions? If so, drop a 2 in the chat. Did you love group work and journaling? Maybe you listened to music while you're studying, and did you enjoy class discussions? That would be a 3. And then for number 4 here, did you look forward to field trips, creative projects, brainstorming sessions, and opportunities to apply your learning to real world problems? And this is where you might start to say, wait, I'm a blend. I'm a 1 and a 3. I'm a 2 and a 4, whatever it is. So what sounds like you? All right, so we have leaning toward 2, maybe strong in 1, some 3s, a 4, 2 and 4. That's really interesting. Lisa was a 2 in school, but a 4 as an adult. So these things can sometimes maybe shift over time or context, right? All right, so some of you may have already figured this out, but this actually also follows the whole brain thinking model, right? So some of those clues into who you are as a learner, as a student, you can also think about how that might translate to your work life as well. And this is what we call a whole brain walk around. We use these all the time in our work, where we try and lay things out according to whole brain thinking quadrants. And I'll give you some ways that you can actually do this with your work so that you can map things out and make sure that you're connecting with all those different thinkers in your audience effectively, and making sure that you're building in content and strategies that are going to reach them in their natural thinking preferences. So if you were a 1, you would actually have a stronger preference in, the A quad, blue thinking, and you can see how it kind of works its way around here, right? I wonder if that lines up with what you imagined your thinking preferences might be when I asked you that in the beginning. Did you land in the same quadrant, or did you start to think about it maybe a little bit differently? So in the education world, a lot of times we would think about this in this way. So it's not what we're pouring into our students that counts, but it's really what's planted. So, from a teacher perspective, and I spent many years working with college faculty and K-12 educators. And a lot of times we would think about, putting together the best lesson plan ever. And I'm going to come up with the most exciting activities that we can do in class. And it just wouldn't work sometimes. So it's not, in the teaching world, it's not necessarily how great your content is, but it's actually what are your strategies to make sure that content sticks with students, and so that they have a chance to actually plant and apply what they're getting in the classroom, what they're learning. So if we think about that from content marketing perspective, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's not what content what we create that counts, even though we think it's brilliant and we're so proud of it. And sometimes we're so proud of it, right? And we think it's so great and we can't wait to get it out there. But it's really about what clicks with people. And that's sort of where we should be starting from. And whole brain thinking is one way that we can think about how can we click with people better or differently, more strategically. And, I use clicks here a little playfully because it's also what people click on, what is going to resonate with them? How do we reach them and kind of tap into their natural curiosity? Well, one way we can do that is sort of speak to them in their own language and adjust them in a way that will just kind of feel right to them, because we're talking to them in their own thinking preferences. So we talked about this a little bit already, and you guys demonstrated it actually beautifully when I asked you what you think your top thinking preferences are, because you were kind of all over the map, right? So in the marketing world, I had asked some colleagues actually, if I was to create sort of a sample profile of a marketing professional, what would that look like? And we ended up having a really good discussion about it. We were like, it would sort of be a 1-1-1-1, which you can have that profile, but that would mean that you have a really strong preference in everything. And just the way the marketing field has evolved, we kind of do have to do a little bit of everything, right? So if we break it out a little bit and look a little bit more, instead of saying just a marketing professional, we look a little bit more by some of the sub functions that we do. So a project manager probably is going to have a higher preference in green, probably a decent, moderate to high preference in blue. And then they might have some red and yellow too, because they're enjoying working with people, probably a little bit lower yellow because they're going to be more interested in keeping things on track, sticking to a sequence. That's sort of naturally where they might go. For data analysis, which is now part of everyone's job, right? Unless you happen to have a specialized data analyst on staff, they will have that natural curiosity about the metrics and the numbers, and I really want to know what the results are. And so they're going to have a pretty high blue preference, and likely some high green too, because when you're thinking about how to evaluate data, that's a process really in and of itself. So you'll probably see them between project managers and data analysts. You'll see them lean a little bit further to the left, kind of side of their thinking preferences. And then we think about our visual design friends, and they're going, they could have any kind of other mix of blue, green, and red, but they're definitely going to have a high preference in yellow. So yellow thinkers are visual. They like to think in pictures. They like to see illustrations and animations. I mentioned earlier, they might doodle. So they're definitely going to lean into that quadrant. And then kind of the sort of strategist type people, potentially some of your marketing directors too, they're going to likely be higher yellow, higher blue. So they're going to want to be able to evaluate the results and understand the metrics, but they're also going to want to think outside of the box. So it's really kind of abstract type thinking. Let's talk about ideas and concepts versus let's think about how to operationalize this necessarily. So let's come up with a strategy and a vision. So what's kind of cool about this, and this also should validate any of you that are asking for additional people to be added to your team, this is why we need a marketing team, right? Because one of us is going to have blind spots if we try and tackle all of those different functions by ourselves. So there are going to be things that we need to watch out for, and it's a great case for bringing other people into the work because they're going to round out your team. So if you look at a team profile, and that's an actual team profile that I pulled there, the bigger one on the right, team profiles are generally a lot better balanced than an individual profile. So when you start looking at a team, they often are going to either have a pretty high strength in all the quadrants, or they'll be kind of moderate, but they'll be, covering all the bases basically. So I wanted to do another kind of activity. So we looked at specific people and behaviors that they might, have that we notice, where we can get clues into people's thinking. But I also wanted to take it now to the specific content, and we can think about how content can also be whole-brained or not whole-brained, or how it might kind of lean into a specific preference. And before I do that, I just wanted to see, are there any questions or anything that people want covered before we keep going? Because I know I've thrown a lot of stuff at you before you've even had a chance to take the assessment. Also, just pausing so I can take a sip out of my fun pineapple glass here. I like to keep this around so I feel like I'm on vacation.
I think that's the perfect thing. It's perfect.
All
And
right.
again, if anybody does have questions, just feel free to put them in the chat and we'll definitely get to them
Yeah,
as Ashley goes through it.
absolutely. Feel free to jump in at any point. I don't want anyone sitting with questions. So if you look at this ad, just kind of look at it on its surface. Don't think too hard about it. But what would you imagine this ad, what kind of thinking would this appeal to the most? Now that you know a little bit about whole brain thinking and you're starting to kind of get a sense of the model and how these things break down. As you look at this, what jumps out to you? And what would you guess? And you can just drop it in chat again, whatever quadrant. So A is blue, B is green, C is red, D is yellow. And Arnell?
I'd definitely say relational.
Relational, okay.
Yeah.
I see that coming through in the chat as well.
I don't know, just looking at it, it's touching on like the heart feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just like, we're working together. Okay.
Okay.
We're trying to get something better. So it's definitely, I think it's relational because of that word together.
So I would agree with you. And again, as I was going through ads and trying to find ones that I felt like really aligned with one over another, it's actually pretty hard to do, which is the whole point. And we're going to talk about that, how you can make sure that the content that you're creating is touching on lots of different pieces and different, thinking preferences. So what stood out to me when I saw this and I thought, oh, this is relational, is that, again, like you said, it's working it out together. There's this kind of sense of community. You've got people there teaming up to like move blocks out of the way. There's the whole connects word at the bottom that is probably part of the company or brand. But I agree. So, I also see some people saying yellow. I think you could make a case for that too. They are literally outside of the box over here, down here. So I'd be curious what else kind of made you think yellow too. So feel free to drop that in chat. And I've got a few more of these for you. So same question, looking at this ad, what type of thinking might this ad appeal to the most? What kind of thinkers are they maybe trying to tap into here?
This one is kind of stumping me a little bit.
So Anne has a strong background in this, I should say, but it's a metaphor, yellow tilt, along with a little bit of the red, potentially. Yep, some people are saying experimental yellow. So that was my thinking too. And my reasoning was it's really visual. There's not a lot of words here. It's very metaphorical, as Anne was saying. Remember, yellow thinkers really like pictures, animations. They want to see it. It's also playful and humorous. So you could be playful and humorous really in any of the quadrants, but that's something that's pretty key for yellow thinkers that would have a strong preference in experimental thinking. It's often where we think of how do we make it fun? How do we make it, how do we play with this a little bit? And just that kind of creativity. All right. So this next one, simple steps to help stop the spread. What would you guess?
I want to say analytical thinking, but but I don't. Okay, I could. Analytical, maybe a bit of green.
Okay.
But, and this could just be from me, I also kind of get a little bit of relational from it, because if you kind of think deeper about it, like the way that whatever the what we're trying to talk to spread for, it has how it affects people. So I feel like it could be mainly analytical, but I'm getting a little bit of everything.
All right. Well, the interesting thing about what you're saying is that the clues that you're picking up on really are aligning with the quadrants. So you're getting it already because you're making the connection. You're like, well, it's about people, so maybe it's red, but there's steps, so maybe it's green.
Yeah.
So I went with green. I went with structural thinking because, we're leading with simple steps. And then
Yeah.
also at the bottom, it's hard to see, but there are links and there's places that we're directing people for more information, visit. So we're telling them, go here, do this. So when you think about green thinking, it really is that kind of operational, process oriented implementation. Like, what do we do next? How do we do this? And so that's kind of what jumped out to me. So then this last one, and maybe I shouldn't have made it so easy because if you know that I'm doing all 4 quadrants, you already know what this is. So I'll just jump ahead here. We are talking about blue, right? Blue thinking, analytical thinking. And I'll go back so you can see some of the stuff blown up here. So it's all about, it's these kind of quantitative words and keys, less and more. The number 100, we're talking about nutrition facts and they're listed there. At the bottom, the tagline is crunch the numbers. So this would totally appeal to someone with analytical thinking preference, right? So Tatiana said they just had an aha moment. Each person might get a bit more of the quadrant they most strongly align with in their own thinking. So that's another interesting point too, is you might be picking up on things or you might be identifying things because that's where your preferences are. So you might notice certain things about an ad because it aligns with your thinking, right? And that's exactly what we're talking about with igniting demand. So how can we use whole brain thinking to ignite demand? That was the whole point of this session. I know you've had lots of other conversations about this today. So let's take some time, and I'll give you some time to actually think about this in your own work. How can you create content that's going to tap in to people's preferences, where they're going to see themselves reflected in the content because that's how they think, right? So here are some really specific strategies. So I broke it up by types of content and how those types of content would align with each of the 4 quadrants. And there is some crossover here. So starting in the blue, case studies is a really great way to connect with people. But I also heard that come up in a previous session today where we talked about maybe it's not case studies, it's actually case stories. So you could see how that would potentially align with people in relational thinking too. And you could also make the case with case studies that green thinkers like case studies because it shows the exact implementation plan. A case study usually tells you exactly what people did and how they did it. So case studies really, you could position those almost in the middle, honestly. But some of these others are pretty unique to the different types of thinking. So blue thinkers are really going to like things like databases, glossaries, providing definitions of terms. Green thinkers also really like definitions of terms and dictionaries. Things like guest experts. So, when you think about TED Talks, you might think, oh, well, that's people. So that would be relational, or it's usually big ideas. So that might be yellow thinkers. But blue thinkers also really love to hear from an expert. They love to hear from someone who knows the facts, who has experience in an area. So guest experts, don't overlook that for them. Blue thinkers like people too. Also infographics, that's kind of, I think, an obvious one, including references, providing reports, showing your research, directing people to, where they can get further reading. And then again, TED Talks, wikis. So those would all really click with a blue thinker. Your green thinkers are going to like calendars, checklists. They love FAQs because you're anticipating questions that they already have and you're answering them for them. They also love how-to kind of articles, listicles, timelines, tutorials, and they really like quizzes. They like to sort of check their knowledge and make sure that they're kind of tracking along with it. Your relational thinkers are going to enjoy, this I think seems pretty obvious, but I'm also a high red thinker, so it might seem obvious to me. But they're going to like cohorts and being part of a community, group discussions, forums. They love interviews because it's people engaging and interacting. So some of the panels that we saw earlier today, people were probably loving that. Live chats and personalization. So they love when you email them and use their name and ask how they're doing. And then they tend to be a little bit more auditory. So things like music and podcasts they enjoy, and then storytelling. So make it a story, make it personal, and that will really click with them. And then yellow thinkers are going to like animations and opportunities to brainstorm. Again, the playful, they really like games. They love illustrations. So, a lot of times you'll see content that's sort of just, there's not a lot of words. It's more metaphorical, and they're just going to use pictures. So yellow thinkers would really like that, as well as things like simulations, storyboarding, and again, just heavy in the visuals. So hopefully this can be a resource for you as you start to think about, hey, I have this upcoming campaign. And when I look at my campaign, I realize it's lacking in some of these areas, right? So you might be missing out on some thinkers there. For those of you that are doing events, so think about just kind of experiential content. One thing that we always would talk about in the education space, this comes from a learning and development model, is that you want to lean much heavier into the experiential. So it's sometimes called the 70-20-10 rule, where you're giving people a chance to apply learning to their own experiences. You're also creating opportunities for them to connect and be social. And then the technical kind of training that you're providing is actually, that should be the least of what you're giving. So if you're putting together, some kind of academy or a course or something like that, you also want to make sure people have a chance to talk to other people about it, and then that they have a chance to apply it. So we sometimes talk about this in our work as going whole, so make sure that when you're designing anything, whether it's content or an experience, that you're really designing it in a whole-brained way. And that brings us to putting you to work now. So I want to give you just a few minutes. You can put on some music, do whatever, if you're a relational red thinker, do whatever you need to do. But take a look at this checklist and try and think of a specific project you're working on right now. It could be something bigger than just one piece of content, right? So maybe you're doing a blog and you've got some social posts that are going with it, and anything that you're working on. And as you go through it, do a little inventory, check yourself, and ask, am I including metrics? Am I sticking to the facts? So for blue thinkers, go through the green quadrant here and think about, did I provide any kind of structure or a timeline? Did I provide instructions? Did I anticipate questions? Did I include lists? They love that. Did I make it personal? Did I create opportunities for engagement for the relational thinkers? Did I actually feature people and tell stories? And then for the experimental thinkers, did I include visuals? And did I even tell them why this matters in the first place? Or am I just assuming they'll know? And am I showing them how to apply? And am I making it fun and playful? So it's really hard to do all of this in one piece of content. Imagine how long the email that you would get would be if you use this walk around to write an email. So that's why I'm saying try and think of something a little bit bigger. It's a campaign, it's a series, it's something you're working on that's bigger than just one thing, but make sure that you're covering all these bases. So go ahead and take a few minutes, and really just apply this to your own work. Go ahead.
I have a question while everyone's kind of thinking about this, because you did mention how if we were to put it into like an email, or even if we're thinking about social content or anything in terms of that, how can we use this checklist to kind of incorporate as much as we can without it being a extensive long piece of content that should probably be an article versus an actual email or social post. So how is it that we can actually get that to be a whole brain content?
It's a really good question, and I think probably requires multiple formats of content, right? So it would be, like I said, it would be really hard to do this in one piece. Mary Ellen just said in chat, one way that this can really help is that you're kind of checking yourself a little bit. So, I'm a really high yellow thinker and a really low blue thinker. So when I'm putting something together for an audience that I anticipate just based on it could be their profession or whatever it is that they're going to be high blue, I have to make sure that's a blind spot for me. So I have to make sure that I'm including stats and facts and, I'm providing metrics and references and we're talking about the bottom line because otherwise I'll skip right over that. So this walk around can really help you check yourself and make sure that you're not writing to yourself. I think we all, everyone tends to do that. We default to our own thinking preferences. And I saw someone had asked earlier, actually, how I got interested in this. I had gone through a professional development when I was working with teachers, and we were learning about whole brain thinking. And I was thinking, every teacher should be trained in whole brain thinking because that way they would know how to structure their lesson plan so that they're reaching all of their students. We've all had those teachers that it's just challenging to be in their classroom because we feel like they're not even talking to us, right? Because they're probably not speaking to us in our own thinking preferences. So that was how I got interested in it. And then I saw how much that applies to content creation and marketing too. It's the same kind of principle. It's a way to make sure that you're writing and creating in a whole-brained way, so that whoever is, getting your content they're seeing themselves in it. They feel like you're talking to them. So I think Mary Ellen or someone pointed this out too. If you even look at the agenda that I created for us, I tried as hard as I could, starting with giving you some of the facts and also sharing a little bit of personal information about myself, giving some examples so that you could play with those, providing a structure and a framework so that green thinkers would feel, that they were included, giving, just kind of those elements. Anytime you're creating anything, you can use this to do that. So I'll go back to the checklist slide and just, again, give you a little bit of time to think about how you might use this in your work. And Anne is reminding us too, she says, it's useful to do a review of what's resonating with most of your audience and get clues to their preferences, although you probably have some distribution across all 4 quadrants. So yeah, absolutely. You could think about how this could also be something that you use in your evaluation, right? As you're kind of figuring out what sticks with people. This could be part of how you're evaluating your stuff. All right. Any other thoughts or ideas on how you might use this in your work? Or questions?
Well, this was actually a question that Tatiana asked us a little earlier.
Sure.
So she said, "Hey Ashley, curious, how did you get interested in whole brain thinking, and how do you get buy-in from skeptics?"
That's a really good question. So I shared a little bit about how I got interested in it by, in the education world. I was thinking about how could I use this with teachers so that they could better engage their students. And I started thinking about, wouldn't it be cool if there was whole brain teaching, right? And then how do you get buy-in from skeptics? I haven't encountered too many skeptics once people take the assessment and once they sort of see how this applies to themselves and to their context, I find that people find some application for it, right? Like they find, oh, I could use this for this. One of the first questions people usually ask after they take the assessment and go through their learning journey or get debriefed is, I wonder what my spouse is. This is why we can't talk to each other. This is why we can't communicate. And so I actually did have my husband take it. And and again, I've gone through lots of training on this, but I was really surprised. He and I were so much more similar than I would have ever imagined that we were. And I actually think that can be a barrier sometimes, right? That can be a blocker because we're like spending all of our time where we overlap in our similar quadrants, and we're missing other things in our life, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I haven't encountered too many skeptics. I'd be curious how Anne would answer that actually, because she has much more experience with all of this. This is a good strategy. She says, if you know the preference of your skeptic, you can respond with the right info to help them get it. That's a great tip. So if I'm talking to someone who's skeptical and I know they're a high blue thinker, then I better show them, hey, this assessment is validated. We have 40 years of data on this. We have lots of stats to back this up. I can show you in our platform. Like they would love that. So that's a really good tip.
So I do have a question, because I do know not only can you use whole brain thinking for your content, but it's also a great framework for managers and leaders to use when it comes to leading and guiding their teams. So my question is, as I feel like today we're in a world where every company is basically multi-generational, and our thinking processes come from our own experiences and different situations, industries, and all that. So how can whole brain thinking bring these multiple generations together and make a team that is more on the same page to be able to make content that people are liking and they're just working together in a smooth system?
That's such an interesting question. And I love intergenerational collaboration. It's something I've been passionate about for a really long time, actually. I promise I didn't seed that question at all. I'll tell you a story first. I'll lean into my relational thinking here. But back when I was working at Dartmouth College, and I got to be friends with a man who was 84 years old at the time. And we genuinely got to be friends. We met one day at a coffee shop, and then we just continued to go out for coffee. And turns out we both had a background in education, and et cetera, et cetera. We became good friends. And he led a group. It was based out of his church, and they were called the Amazing Grays. And so he would joke with me that, well, you're a marvelous millennial. And so I was like, I don't know that that's actually a thing, but
I would just stick with it. Just go.
Yeah, I did, and I just kind of rolled with it. I was like, okay, Richard, whatever you say. So anyway, he invited me to get some of my friends together, and he's like, I think that we should get the marvelous millennials and the amazing grays. We should all get together. And so we did, and because we both had a background in education, we put together our own little kind of lesson plan, honestly, of discussion questions and topics that we could ask each other. And it was so fascinating for the younger folks in the room to kind of hear from people who were just at a later stage in life and share sort of what they had been through and their perspective and how they feel about sort of the state of the world. And then for younger people to share what we were anxious about, or, what we're worried about, and how much we had in common. And it was fascinating. So anyway, I'm a big fan of that. And I hadn't actually thought about it from a whole brain perspective until you asked. But I think how this could be a really powerful tool for that is that it's not age specific. So it's not like, oh, you're in this generation or you're in this age bracket, so you're probably likely to be a quadrant heavy in your thinking, or it's, there's no data that shows that this is specific by age group. Mm-hmm. So what you would end up with, I think, is really intergenerational and diverse in terms of their age groups of people that would then all of a sudden realize they have that in common, that they share their thinking preferences, or you know, maybe they have the same least favorite way of thinking. And so I think that could be a really interesting way to sort of bring people together across those lines, because I know, every company that we've worked at, you'll see sort of the younger group coming in and then the old guard, right? And it can create those sometimes challenging work relationships. I'm curious if anyone else had any thoughts on that.
Well, Grace shared that whole brain thinking can help create bonds between shared thinking perspectives too. Um, I think it's interesting. I took the assessment actually a couple weeks ago, and I got I'm very much relational in my thinking, relational and experimental, which I was surprised, and also kind of it made sense. In a lot of ways it made sense, because I would look at content and like working on different tasks, and when it's going through my head and I'm reading and I'm like, okay, this sounds like this to me, but to somebody else it sounds like this. So how can I come off as like sounding like relatable without sounding too analytical? Like,
Yeah.
ask anybody, I can't get into the analytical side of myself. It kind of hurts my soul a little bit, but it's
Same.
interesting to see it in front of you, to see how much you lean into one versus the other, and then how, like, looking at like coworkers, how like you kind of fill in that gap and how you mesh together and how the interactions happen, and like it makes more sense by that.
So you pointed something out actually that I should have highlighted earlier. I'll jump back to one of the slides so you could see some of these thinking preference maps for those of you that haven't seen them as much yet. So it's interesting that you were surprised a little bit, but then you're like, wait, I see myself in this. So for we talked a lot about, how to reach people in their most preferred quadrant. But if you have a really low, a pretty low preference in one of the quadrants, that's something that you might be likely to avoid, like you were saying about analytical thinking,
Yeah.
or it's harder for you to get into that headspace. Doesn't mean you can't do it. So something I want to point out is that this has nothing to do with skill at all. So you could be really good at numbers, but not like them. Or you could be really good at like managing projects, but if that's a lower preference for you, then it might take you more energy, more time. You have to kind of sink into that headspace a little bit. So something I know for myself, I'm a really low blue thinker, low in my analytical thinking. Again, not that I'm not good at it, I just don't prefer it. So when I have to do things like make a budget or put together a report that involves a lot of stats, it takes a lot of energy and time. I'm more of a morning person, so that's something I should do first thing in the day. When I have more energy, I've had my cup of coffee, okay, I can tackle my budget in the morning and I can carve out 2 hours versus maybe something else will only take me a half hour. So that's a way that you can kind of use your understanding and your insight into your lower thinking preferences to also help you and set you up to be more successful. And it gives you some insight into your teammates too, right? So that you can see it's not that they can't do something, it's that they might need more support or they might need more time. So that's a really important thing that you called out there, I think, for people to be aware of.
So one thing, one thing that I did notice from the assessment when I took it was I'm not gonna, no spoilers. Everyone can go ahead and take the assessment. This was just something that was on my mind. I want to get want to get some clarity on it. So there is a part where you talk about high stress situations and how your thinking processes change in these high stress situations. So when it comes to content and you're creating this content, you're using your whole brain thinking, to go ahead and make the content to appeal to all the diverse thinkers in your audience. When, let's say, you put out content, it goes viral, but it goes viral for the wrong reasons. And it just so happens that right now, within the world, there's like a lot of high stress and people are going through a lot of different things. So their thinking preferences are thinking. How can you like be using the framework? How can you keep up with all the changes that are happening to ensure that your content is reaching your audience the right way, and it's not hurting your marketing efforts? It's actually like helping you get to where you need to be.
I mean, I feel like in this day and age, just assume that people are stressed out all the time. But remember, that's going to look different for different people.
Yeah.
So in this example that we're looking at right now on screen, this thinker leans very much, like that's a pretty big shift into their blue thinking when they're under pressure, right? I would be the opposite. I'm already low and I would pull way further back from my blue thinking. So I think the key is actually just making things whole brained and really trying to cover all of those bases that, in that checklist that I shared, or if I can go back to it, that just a quick visual that kind of shows you all the different types of content. The wider variety of stuff that you're providing, the more likely it's going to click with people, whether it's because they're in their under pressure preference or they're just in their natural state, right? So I think this is actually a tool to do that either way, whether people are under pressure or not, honestly. So yeah, that would be my tip. And I know we're coming up close on time. So that's how I would end, is I would just say, go whole, everybody, make your campaigns whole brained. I think we can share some of these resources with you too. Use the checklist, reach out. Grace dropped both of our information, so you can connect with us on LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk about this anytime, so feel free to reach out. We can bounce ideas around.
So if there are any last minute questions, or just want to say hi, or just drop in the chat what the quadrant you're representing. Thank you so much, Ashley. Like, this has been amazing, and I'm so glad I got to ask some of the questions that I've been having since the assessment. And again, thank you. And I hope everybody has learned something great. And I hope you guys take the assessments. And please keep in touch. Let us know what you got, how you're applying it. And yeah, I think we're going to head over to our next
content therapy, right? I need that.
Content therapy. I will see you guys over. And again, thank you so much, Ashley.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Oh, and the session link should be in the chat too, but if you exit the webinar, the session, you'll go straight there. And I think that's it. Thank you, everyone. Are we done? Let me see. I'm not exactly sure how to stop recording.
That's okay. We can cut it. We'll trim it at the end, right?
Yeah.